We're off. Episode 5 of No Huddle. If you guys are tuning in here and thinking, hey, episode 5, what the hell happened? I'm just watching for the first time here. That is because the first 4 episodes were primarily intro podcasts, right? We did an intro on who we are, how we know each other. We did an intro on our season-long teams, an intro into season-long waiver wire strategy, and an intro into our DFS play. I'm excited about today's episode because what we're going to be focusing on is the real meat and potatoes of some of the things that Justin and I like to talk about. DFS, we're talking Showdown. It's the Cowboys at the Giants on Thursday. We're recording this on Wednesday. There could be some injury news that pops up, so bear with that in mind. Justin, thanks for being here. Excited to do this with you. What are your thoughts on the slate?
Initial thoughts. First thing I like to do is look at the total. We have Dallas projected for 25.7 points according to Sabre, and then the Giants at 20.2. Something I like to do is obviously go right to FanDuel and just look at the over-unders, look at the team totals. Just looking at that right there, I could see the Giants not scoring 20 points. So maybe taking that team total under is something I would consider. But as far as that stuff goes, that's probably all I'm looking at right now. And then as we get to the slate, here, I'll share my screen so we can kind of see how I get it started.
Love it. And typically for Showdown, what kind of DFS play do you do?
It's usually I'm not a big Showdown guy. I'm not max entering contest on Showdowns and stuff. It's usually single entry stuff. I'll use the builder to kind of get a consensus of what's going to be played and whatnot, and then I'll build a lineup usually by hand accordingly to what I liked and what I saw on here.
Love it.
But as far as this goes right here, these are the main guys I would consider in the captain slot at this point. You scroll down. I mean, if you're playing bigger tournaments, you can get weird and go different routes just so you can be a little bit different in case something hits. I think the Cowboys D, you and I were just talking, I think they could have a get right game tonight or tomorrow. They've been struggling. I could see, them practicing really hard all week, coaches on them, they might be a little embarrassed. I could see them come out with a little bit of vengeance. See Michael Parsons getting in the backfield, maybe a Diggs interception. But if you're in bigger tournaments, I could see that as a captain play as well. But for what I do, the single entries, 3 entry maxes and whatnot for Showdowns, this is probably what I'll stick to as far as captains go. And then I'll go over here to the flex. Already eliminated some of the people or, the excess of what you don't want and whatnot. I'll probably continue to do that, but we'll stay up here towards the top. I like to go through these projections, see if I like what Sabre spit out. I make a few adjustments. Like this was 9.79. I just went ahead and bumped it up to 10. Brandon Aubrey, I bumped him up a little bit. And kind of what I was saying about Cowboys D, something I like to do is I see the adjusted ownership is going to be right around 8%. I want to make sure that I'm double the field on the Cowboys D, just so I have a better chance of getting that optimal lineup if the Cowboys D is a must-have.
So love that. So I was looking at some of the data. The Cowboys D the past couple weeks has not been great, right? And neither has the Giants D. I'm looking at passing data. They're both in the bottom half of allowed QB rate. I'm referencing fantasy points data. We'll talk about fantasy points a lot in episodes. I like to utilize their data. The Giants allow the 7th highest QB rate, opposing QB rate, and the Cowboys are in the middle at 17. The Cowboys, we saw them struggle last week against the Ravens, but it was primarily on the ground, right? And we saw Lamar run all over them, and especially Derrick Henry. I sorted by rushing defense, success rate against the run, against the defense. The Cowboys are the second worst. They allow the second highest success rate against the rush, and the Giants are third. And so what we might see in this game is a lot of running, a lot of rushing. They allow a ton of yards, chunk plays, you name it. And I think we could actually see this being a really big spot for both rushing teams. I was looking at snap counts a little bit. The Cowboys seem to be, and rightfully so, phasing out Zeke a little bit. We saw 51% snap share in week 1, We saw 40% snap share in week 2 and 19% snaps in week 3. It hasn't translated into Rico Dowdle necessarily getting more snaps. He's been in the mid 40s every single week, but I'm really excited about Rico Dowdle being the number one guy. I saw that you bumped him up. I might even bump him up to 11, 12 projected points, because I do think that they are rightfully seeing that Zeke is not the guy, and let's get some more Rico Dowdle.
Yeah, I'm going to do that right now. I agree with what you're saying, especially hearing those running statistics for both defenses. That's kind of alarming that they're both that bad against the run. Yeah, I agree. Probably won't play much Zeke, especially, I mean, just the way it's trending downward week to week, 17%, that you just don't have ample opportunity to score if he's not on the field. Same thing with Devin Singletary. I mean, he could be, a lock button for the flex, especially just with the numbers you were reading off.
Yeah. And then on the receiving standpoint, also looking at fantasy points data, what I've noticed as well is from a receiving standpoint, I think I want to actually target receivers somewhat on both teams. I think both the Giants and the Cowboys do have some potential holes, as I referenced earlier. But what I noticed was that both the Giants and the Cowboys are actually really good against the slot. The Giants are best against the slot, allowing target rate, targets received to the slot, and Cowboys are third. And so what that shows to me is that it is not a Wan'Dale Robinson game, who primarily plays in the slot. Malik Neighbors looks amazing. He primarily plays out wide. And so I think that's an opportunity. And on the flip side, CD, they'll move around a little bit, but I think you can absolutely continue to play CD, obviously. He does run about 56% in the slot, but CD is matchup proof, right? I think he's a great captain spot.
Yep. With that, where does Jalen Tolbert usually line up?
Yeah, Jalen Tolbert runs on the outside, 71% of the time on the outside, 28.8% in the slot. The Cowboys mix and match a little bit. You're going to get CD in the slot some, Tolbert a little bit, but primarily it is Turpin at 88% of his snaps in the slot. And so I think what that shows to me is, in Showdown, we have to get a little bit unique. We have to play low owned or cheap players. I don't think Turpin's the guy necessarily. He's going to be cheap. He's at 4,000, a projected ownership of 1 to 2% as of now. I think the field is rightfully avoiding him. 4,000 is probably too much for a guy like that in a arguably more difficult matchup.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of leads to my next question for my next receiver. Where does Brandon Cooks line up in all this mess?
Yeah, let me pull that up right now. Cooks is 68% of the time outside and 31% in the slot. Gotcha. So he's a good target.
Gotcha. Just looking, he's projected for 22% ownership right now, so he'll be played in the flex. I think I like the Tolbert play.
Yeah. I'm good with Tolbert. I'm good with Cooks. I think primarily what I'm going to do is target running backs. For the most part, what I do for Showdown is 150 lineups in the big lotto tournament, right? $12, $15, $20, and going for gold, right? I'm kind of getting a little bit weird on purpose. And typically what I do for captain is quarterbacks, if they have rushing upside. And to my point earlier, I think both of these quarterbacks can rush a little bit, and both of these defenses have allowed rushing yards to quarterbacks. And so I think that's interesting. Cool with both of the quarterbacks in the captain slot. Cool with both Singletary, who has looked awesome this year. He could have easily scored 2 touchdowns last week. He purposely went down at the 1. And then to my point earlier, it looks like they're phasing out Zeke. And so I think Dowdle could be somebody who maybe goes a little bit under the radar. His projected ownership in flex right now is at 23%. And his projected ownership in the captain spot right now is 4%. If he gets 80% of the workload, 70% of the workload from a running back position, he could score 2 touchdowns. He could catch 5 balls. there's a really good world where he could actually be the optimal captain.
And I think it's not a bad idea with those 150 contests that you're doing to have a little sprinkle of those other Dallas running backs. Like, just in case. Like, I mean, like we were just saying, Rico Dowdle's only played around 45% every single week. Zeke's starting to get phased out. He's down to 17%. Someone's going to get those other snaps. And, if it's Lipka catching 3 more balls, one of them turns into a touchdown, all of a sudden he's a must-have.
Yeah, that was something that you and I were looking at right before this, right? Who did those snaps go to that Zeke was out, right? It doesn't necessarily look like it went to Dowdle. Hunter Lupke, right? He ended up playing 38% of the snaps. He's primarily a fullback, but the nice thing is that he got a lot of work from a receiving standpoint. Not going to get a handoff a lot, but he got 3 targets, 2 catches, 40 something yards. A little fluky, right? But if that kind of work continues at 800 in Showdown, he's only projected to be owned about 2% right now. I could see that going up, but I think that that's a really good, cheap option in play here.
We just, as we're recording, we get a text from D-Bro saying the Giants corners are decimated, all the Dallas passing overs. So
yeah. So I like it, especially on the outside. And then to our point earlier, let's continue to probably avoid the slot a little bit, and they're going to mix and match. But I think a CD play against the Giants is obviously probably the most optimal captain and probably going to be the most owned at captain. No issues with that. He'll be one of the top owned plays on the slate. No issues with that at all. It looks like right now, sorting by projected ownership, we get Dak in the top slot, then Singletary, then CD. I wouldn't be surprised if Singletary and CD split. People are probably going to try to do Singletary for a little bit of value, but CD projects to be the highest from a raw points perspective. He and Dak are really close. To Debro's point, I think running the Cowboys passing stack is not a bad option at all.
Totally.
What do you mentioned earlier? So you typically do maybe one or couple hand-built lineups for Showdown. What is your typical tournament that you're jumping in? I think you do a small league with buddies, right?
Yeah,
you're probably trying to do top 2.
Yeah, so we do top 2 get paid, usually around 10 to 15 guys are in it. We have one with the Cubs League, and then I have one with my buddies back home. I'm always entering those. And then I'm usually doing single entry up to like 3 entry max. Usually, like, I'll do some of the bigger contests where there's a lot of people entering, and with those lineups, I usually get a little bit weirder with those lineups since there are so many people in it. And then, the contests that are like 200 people and below, I'll get chalky and then have like one little take that I like for the game and then put that guy in. That's kind of how I operate.
Love that. I am thinking maybe we go ahead and build a lineup right now.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Awesome. You want to do it on your screen or my screen?
Do it on your screen, just because I don't really use DraftKings on my laptop that much.
Yeah, I gotcha. Hold on. There we go. All right. Let's pull up DraftKings right now. So let's lock in that captain spot. I don't know exactly for my 150. I typically like to do, to my point earlier, quarterbacks if they're rushing quarterbacks. And I think in a smaller tournament that you're talking about, I think that makes total sense. I think you could lock in CD. I think we're going to quickly find out that the price of CD is a little bit restrictive if we can't find any good value. We talked about a little bit of risky value, right? With Hunter and whatnot. And so let's go ahead and build. Who do you want in your captain spot as of now?
I want Daniel Jones in my captain spot.
I like that. I like that play. There's a world certainly where he passes for over 200 yards and rushes one in, maybe throws one or two, and he is the optimal captain without a doubt. And I think he provides you, he's looking good. Neighbors has kind of unlocked his value a little bit, right? And if we saw what we saw last week with Lamar rushing, if that continues, I think that's really interesting. Does that mean that you want to pair him with Neighbors in this lineup too?
Yeah, you would. It would make sense to put Neighbors in there with him. I'll let you get the next one since the Neighbors was kind of a gimme.
Yeah, no, I like that. So I'm going to avoid the slot. Do you want to let's target either? I think we could bring it back with Cooks, or we look at some running with Dowdle. I think at 6,400, Dowdle provides some really good value, and I think both Cooks and Dowdle could be good options for this lineup. One or both. What do you think?
I think going Dowdle and Tolbert this is the big contest, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think going Dowdle and Tolbert is
Okay.
something that would be interesting.
All right, cool. 5,800 for Tolbert. We saw him have a good game last week.
Mhm.
A little bit fluky, but to your point, if we're playing the big tournament, I think that is a totally fair play. And again, if we're going really crazy, do we want to try to go with Hunter? We have Dowdle in here as well, but I think it's very viable that Hunter grabs 2 balls like he did last week and ends up scoring 4 points, maybe 5, and he is the optimal play just because of his price.
Yeah, that totally could happen. Scroll up a little bit. Let me see what
Yeah.
else is. What about Brooks? Hasn't Brooks been getting some work?
Yeah, let me double check it here. We saw Brooks get
3 targets.
40%. Yeah, we saw him get 40% of the snaps in week 2, but only 16% in week 3. I don't know if that's a Ferguson issue coming back. It's a little bit up in the air. 16% of targets last week makes me a little bit concerned to play him, but to your point, he did get 3 targets out of those 16% of snaps. So
Yeah.
13 plays, 3 targets. That's a pretty good share right there.
Seems like there's plays designed for him.
Yeah, and he got a long one too at 24 yards. I mean, I think there's a world where that could be duplicated.
So we got average remaining salary of just under 6,500. We got 2 more players.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, obviously, you could go 2 middle guys and avoid the top, or you could go top and then go cheap elsewhere.
Yeah, it would. Here's the funny thing that what's decent here is something like CD. It worries me to fade CD. I think he's going to have huge ownership, and he could easily go to Debro's point, 100 and a touchdown, right? And not having him in your lineup would be absolutely detrimental. But the problem is if we click CD, we got 1,100 remaining. That doesn't leave much. That leaves Schumacher and Hunter, and then we're looking at 4 Cowboys against 2 Giants. The nice thing is that we do have that Giant in the captain spot. I don't think this is a bad lineup by any means. I think you could kind of run your options here. I want to look if Shoemaker lost his snaps last week with Ferguson back. Doesn't look like it. He played 40% in week 2, 31% in week 3. My assumption is that they ran and may continue to run more 2 tight end sets. And so, Schumacher could continue to get it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like we were saying, in this contest, you have to be different. You have to
Yeah.
have some random people in there. And I feel like this lineup is something, if it goes right, like this is the kind of lineup that ends up being in first place. And I look back at it and I'm like, yeah, I would have never built that.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. I think that's one of the main things that DFS players screw up on, at least casual DFS players, is not tailoring their lineup to what they're playing, right? I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are like, yeah, I like this guy, I like this guy, this guy's going to do good, whatever. But they're not thinking that, hey, you're up against 100,000 entrants. I need to be a little bit weird to stand up over the crowd to not get a big dupe if it does win. And I think this is one of the lineups that could get there. Let's go ahead and lock in. Let's go Schumacher. And then what I want to do, if cool with you, let's build
Oh no, you're freezing.
appropriate for the tournament that you're
You're freezing a little bit.
playing, a small against smaller amount of people, maybe something like 277 people, and we'll kind of jokingly or mock up as if it was one of your home leagues that you like to do.
Totally. Let me. If we're doing, so I would consider this like a little bit chalkier, maybe
Yeah.
not. I would probably go Devin Singletary in the captain.
Yeah. I'm cool with
Um,
that.
go ahead and get CD in there.
Yep. Yeah, especially in a smaller tournament like this, you don't want to run a lineup without CD.
Yeah, I think you have to have one of the quarterbacks. I think you take Daniel Jones. He's cheaper and has the rushing upside.
Yeah. And I'm almost curious, we probably can't get both in. If we would, that would leave 3,000. Because I do love playing both quarterbacks, especially in smaller ones. These three are going to lock up 60 fantasy points. That's going to put you in a good position.
Yes. If you
Can we afford to do that?
I'm looking right now.
We'd have to go a little bit risky. We could play a kicker. So kickers is a funny topic on Twitter in terms of, do we play kickers in Showdown? Kickers are a little bit random. If a kicker is going to do well any given game, any given week. And so this notion that we can predict kicker performance, I think in my mind is flawed. And in my mind, in the big tournaments, either play a kicker if there's no other good value, right? If you can't find any good backups, if you can't find any good value. And if a kicker is going to be chalky, like Brandon Aubrey might be, let's check his projected ownership really quick. But in something big, I think he's going to be pretty chalky. For me, that's a fade. We're looking at 22%. I think in a smaller tournament, I think he makes sense. But in the big one, kickers are random. And at 20% plus, I don't think it's necessarily worth it at a salary of 5K.
I would have to agree with you. So what do you have there? You have Singletary, Lamb, Jones, and Prescott.
Yeah. So Johnson, Theo Johnson, Giants tight end, had a touchdown last week. That was, what was that?
I saw him drop a touchdown.
Exactly. He had a should have been touchdown. He's getting used. He played 81% of snaps last week. I think he's a great option for this lineup.
So you had Theo Johnson in there. We're now at 3,700.
Can't really go Giants D. Slayton has the Q tag right now. He's listed as questionable. Slayton made a brief exit and returned. X-rays negative. My assumption is that he'll play and probably be fine. I think he's an okay option in this kind of tournament, maybe not the best. So, it's a risk if we wanted to play somebody like Slayton, or we have to revise our lineup and remove maybe one of our top options here. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna riff as your food gets here for a second. So I think what I want to do here is I want to play around with removing Singletary as my captain spot, and maybe thinking of somebody like Cooks is a little bit of a risky option. I talked about slots against the Cowboys.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I would never take. May I open the wing for you?
Yes, please. I can't hear you right now. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh no, I think maybe my mic cut out as you left. Okay. All right, everyone. If
I
you
think
guys
it did. As soon as I was getting up, I stopped. I couldn't hear you anymore.
all right. Apologies, everyone. I was trying to riff a little bit, but I think my mic died. Bear with us. We talked about this earlier. This is the No Huddle podcast on purpose. We call it No Huddle because we're kind of, just winging it as we go. We don't have planned content. We don't have planned topics necessarily or questions. We're just going through it. We're not a very professional high-end podcast. Dude, what did you get for lunch? That looks amazing.
Philly cheesesteak.
Oh, yeah. Good work. So as you were rolling out, I was continuing to build, I think, a pretty fun lineup here. We have Singletary in the captain spot. We got Lamb, Prescott, Dowdle, and Aubrey from the Cowboys perspective, followed by Theo Johnson on the Giants standpoint. I think this is a really safe lineup for something smaller. You're probably going to need Singletary to score a touchdown, to do work. You got CD, Dak, and Dowdle, who could obviously do well against this defense. Brandon Aubrey, we talked about earlier. Kickers are a little bit fluky, but should have a good day. And Theo Johnson is getting increased work as one of Daniel Jones' primary target. You cool with this?
I really like that. I'm making it right now for the Cubs.
Love it. All right, cool.
How much is remaining?
1,700. I don't know if there's any good upgrade spots.
There's really not.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we upgrade Theo anywhere, but no. Do we upgrade Brandon Aubrey? There's not really any options there.
The only thing we'll do is Rico Dowdle up to Brandon Cooks, but don't really love it.
Yeah, it's not a bad option because you do have Dak, so you could go CD and Cooks. It's not a bad option. That's a good opportunity for folks to kind of mess around with, or Ferguson.
Yeah,
that's three really good options.
I agree. If there was anything to change with that would be it.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, you get your option of kind of that 7K range, if you will, of these three being very viable. And if you think that Zeke is going to get a little bit extra run, you could slot him in there.
Totally.
Love it. Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. Apologies for the mic issue. Thanks all for joining. We're going to do this. We talked about in one of our intro podcasts that ultimately Justin and I like to jump on and chat through a slate, talk and strategy a little bit, what we're seeing in the data. And that's the whole goal here for the podcast, for the show, is just to chat with you all. So thank you so much for joining. I'm Drew. That's Justin. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.